The afternoon light slanted across the living room, glinting off the polished wood of the piano that had sat in the same corner for as long as I could remember. My mother, Evelyn Hart, was standing by the window, her hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain teacup. The steam rose in thin, lazy spirals, catching the golden glow of the sun. She didn't turn when I spoke. "Mom," I said quietly, almost testing the air, "I sold your piano." The words hung between us like dust motes in sunlight, visible, fragile, inescapable. Her hand trembled slightly, the tea rippling just enough to betray her stillness. But she didn't look at me. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she exhaled, soft and slow, and placed the cup down on the sill. It made the faintest sound, porcelain on wood, like the muted strike of a single key. For a moment, I wondered if she had heard me at all. Growing up, that piano was the center of our home. Not just a piece of furniture, but a witness to laughter, arguments, birthdays, and heartbreaks. I used to crawl beneath it when I was small, tracing the patterns carved into its legs while she played. Even when words failed her, the piano never did. Its voice was her language. But times change, and so do priorities. The hospital bills had stacked high after Dad's passing, the house repairs, my younger sister's college tuition. Everything had become a calculation of survival. Selling the piano had seemed like the sensible thing to do, practical, necessary, adult. And yet, standing there in front of her, I felt like a child again, the kind who once begged her to play Claire de Lune just one more time before bed. "Did you hear me?" I asked, forcing my voice steady. "They're coming to pick it up this evening." She turned then, slowly, her eyes a pale shade of gray, like storm clouds before rain met mine. For a heartbeat, I thought she would shout or cry or say something sharp that would cut right through me. But she didn't. She simply nodded once. "All right," she said, her voice quiet, the faintest echo of something old like a melody she'd long forgotten. I wanted her to be angry, to fight me, to tell me I was wrong. Instead, her calmness unsettled me more than any argument could. "Mom, you don't have to pretend," I said. "I know what it means to you, but..." She raised a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "No, Nathan," she said. "You don't know." Her words weren't harsh. They were heavy, worn, the kind that carried a weight of memories I had never been invited to share. For years, I'd thought music was just her hobby, something she did when she wasn't busy keeping our lives from falling apart. But as I watched her that day, her eyes distant, I realized I'd never actually asked her why she played. All I'd ever done was listen. And even that not often enough. Later, I went upstairs and found my younger sister, Lily, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her laptop open. The faint hum of the fan filled the silence. "Did you tell her?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah," I said. She didn't react. Lily's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "That's worse." I sighed and sank onto the edge of her bed. "We need the money, Lil. You know that." "I know," she said softly, "but knowing doesn't make it easier." Downstairs, I could hear the faint creak of the piano bench. I froze. Then slowly, a sound, one single note drifted up through the floorboards. Then another. Hesitant, uneven, like steps on unfamiliar ground. Mom hadn't played in years, not since Dad's funeral. I went to the top of the stairs and listened. The melody was faint, trembling, yet it carried something I couldn't name. It wasn't a song I recognized. It was slower, gentler, like someone remembering how to breathe after a long silence. I stood there until the last note faded. Then the house was still again. That night, when I passed the living room, the piano lid was closed. A small sheet of paper lay on top, folded neatly. My name, Nathan, was written in her tidy cursive. Inside, she'd written only one line: "Don't sell it until I play it one last time." I stared at the words for a long while, my chest tightening with something I couldn't quite explain. Because in that moment, I realized that even silence had a sound if you listened closely enough. The next morning, I woke to the faint scent of coffee and something else, something old, wooden, faintly sweet, like the piano's varnish, stirred back to life. When I came downstairs, the living room was already filled with light. Evelyn sat at the piano bench, her back straight, her hair pulled into a loose braid that fell over her shoulder. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, not touching, almost as if she were afraid to wake the memories sleeping beneath them. I hesitated by the doorway. "You're up early." She didn't turn. I couldn't sleep. Her voice was calm, but I caught a tremor in it, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. "I thought maybe," she said after a pause, I should say goodbye properly." The words landed heavy in my chest. She pressed one key, then another. Slowly, she began to play a melody I'd never heard before. It was fragile at first, searching. Then, gradually, it gathered courage, like sunlight breaking through thin clouds. The notes filled the air with something I hadn't felt in years. Something soft, intimate, almost holy. I stood in silence, watching her shoulders rise and fall with every phrase, the way her hands moved, graceful, practiced, a kind of language only she understood. It struck me then how much I'd forgotten about her, how much of her life existed before me. Before Lily, before the house bills and quiet nights and the weight of all that went unsaid. She was not just my mother. She had been someone before that, someone with a world of her own. When the melody paused, I found my voice again. "What song is that?" I asked. She didn't look up. "It doesn't have a name," she said. "I never finished it." I frowned. "You wrote it?" Evelyn gave a small nod. Her eyes stayed fixed on the keys, but I saw a faint smile flicker at the corner of her lips, not from pride, but from memory. "I started it a long time ago," she said. "Before I met your father, I used to think I'd finish it one day. But then, life happened. Marriage, work, you two." She gave a small laugh that sounded more like a sigh. "I suppose I thought I had time." I wanted to ask why she never played anymore, why she stopped composing, but something in her posture, the quiet stillness, the way her gaze softened when she looked at the instrument, told me I didn't need to. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was her diary. Every key, a page she'd turned away from. And now, I'd sold it. When she stopped playing, the silence that followed was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said finally. Evelyn turned then, her eyes meeting mine, gentle, tired, and so full of understanding it hurt. "I know you didn't, Nathan." "Then why does it feel like I did?" She smiled faintly. "Because some things you can't replace, and when they're gone, you realize they weren't just things." Her hand brushed the piano keys one last time, a soft, lingering touch, like saying farewell to an old friend. That evening, I called the buyer. His name was Marcus Lee, a music professor from the next town over. He'd offered a fair price and promised to restore it with care. But when I told him we might need to delay the pickup, he paused. "Is something wrong?" "My mother wants to play it one last time," I said. There was silence on the other end. Then his voice, quiet but warm. "Then you let her. A piano should never leave a house without a proper goodbye." When I told her that night, she just nodded. "Tomorrow," she said, "at dusk." It sounded like she was making an appointment with something sacred. The next day felt unusually long. I tried to distract myself. Went through bills, called the repairman, even helped Lily with her online application. But every time I passed the living room, I felt the piano watching me, waiting. When dusk finally arrived, the light turned golden, softening the edges of everything. Evelyn wore her old blue cardigan, the one my father used to say made her eyes look like sea glass. She sat at the piano bench with a quiet grace, like she was taking her place on stage for a performance no one had asked for, but everyone needed. "Would you like me to record it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. Some things are meant to be remembered, not replayed." And then she began. This time the melody was different. The same song, but finished. Each note carried weight, sorrow, beauty. There was something in it that reached beyond music, a story that could only be told through sound. Lily came down the stairs, barefoot, drawn by the music. She sat beside me, eyes glistening. For a few minutes, we weren't a family with debts or regrets. We were just listeners sitting in the golden light of our mother's final song. And then, as the last chord faded, Evelyn lowered her hands into her lap. The silence that followed was absolute. She turned to us and smiled softly. "Now," she whispered, "it's ready to go." The next morning, the movers came. They wrapped the piano carefully, lifting it onto the truck. I stood beside my mother on the porch, both of us silent as the sound of straps tightening filled the air. When the truck pulled away, she whispered something I almost didn't catch. "It's strange," she said, "letting go of something that once held your entire heart." I glanced at her, but she was watching the empty space in the living room window, the one where the piano had always stood. "It'll find another home," I said quietly. She nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on that space as if part of her was still playing. That night, I dreamed of her music. The same melody haunting, unfinished, echoing through a place that didn't quite exist. And in the dream, she turned to me and said, "Now, do you understand?" When I woke, I didn't know what she meant. Not yet. But I would. Soon. The house felt emptier than I'd ever known it. It wasn't just the missing piano, it was the silence that replaced it. A silence that wasn't peaceful, but hollow. It followed me from room to room like a ghost that refused to rest. Evelyn moved slower that week. She still made breakfast, still smiled when Lily came home from class, but there was something quieter in her, like her laughter had gone with the piano. She spent most of her time near the window, watching the light shift across the hardwood floor, where faint marks showed where the piano's legs had once stood. Sometimes I caught her humming. Barely audible, fragments of the song she'd played that night. It came and went like a whisper from another life. One evening, I found her in the attic. The air was thick with dust and the scent of cedar. She was sitting on a wooden chest, an old photo album open across her lap. "Didn't think you came up here anymore," I said, brushing cobwebs from the rafters. "I don't," she replied softly. "But sometimes, when the house feels too quiet, I come up to remember the noise." I smiled faintly. "The noise?" She nodded, her eyes still on the photos. "Laughter. Your father's terrible singing. You and Lily arguing over who got to sit on the piano bench while I played." She chuckled lightly. "The kind of noise that makes a home." I leaned against a beam, watching her fingers trace the corners of a photograph. It was one of her much younger, standing beside a small upright piano in what looked like a cramped studio. Her expression in the photo was pure joy. "Is that you?" I asked. "Yes," she said. 19 years old, my first piano. I looked closer. "You look happy." "I was," she whispered. "I had nothing back then, but I had that piano. I used to think if I could just write the perfect song, people would understand me. Every note, every silence, it felt like breathing." I sat down beside her. "What happened, Mom?" Her smile faded. "Life happened, Nathan." Dreams are fragile things. They don't always survive the real world. She closed the album and looked at me, then really looked. But you shouldn't make the same mistake I did. Don't trade your voice for comfort or for fear. I frowned. I don't even know what my voice is. She smiled sadly. Then maybe it's time to find it. A few days later, a letter arrived. The return address read, Marcus Lee, the man who had bought the piano. Inside was a short note and a small flash drive. Dear Nathan, I hope you don't mind me writing. I finished restoring your mother's piano. While tuning it, I found a few old sheets of music inside the bench. Handwritten, worn, clearly composed by her. I recorded the pieces so they wouldn't be lost. I thought your family might want to hear them one last time. With respect, Marcus Lee. I stared at the note for a long time. The handwriting was elegant, careful, like someone who understood the weight of words. I called Lily downstairs, and together we plugged in the flash drive. The file was simply titled Evelyn Hart to 1979. When I pressed play, the first sound was a faint crackle, then the piano. Her piano. The melody that followed was hauntingly familiar, and yet different. Fuller. It wasn't the song she'd played at dusk. It was something older, younger, filled with hope and ache and the quiet longing of someone who hadn't yet been broken by life. Lily covered her mouth with her hand. That's Mom, she whispered. We sat in silence, listening. Every note carried a story of who she had been, who she had loved, who she had lost. And as the song reached its final chord, I felt something tighten in my chest. For the first time, I understood why she'd said some things are meant to be remembered, not replayed. Because hearing it now, it didn't just remind us of her, it was her. That evening, I found Evelyn sitting outside on the porch swing, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The night air was cool, and the crickets sang in the distance. I got a letter today, I said, sitting beside her. From Marcus Lee. Her eyes softened. Oh? He found your old compositions. He sent us recordings. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she smiled faintly. He's kind. Most people wouldn't have bothered. Mom, you were amazing, I said, my voice breaking a little. I didn't know you'd written so much music. She looked down into her tea. It was a long time ago, but it still matters. Evelyn's eyes met mine, calm, steady, and full of something I'd never seen before. Pride. Then promise me one thing, she said softly. Anything. Don't let silence be the only thing you inherit from me. I didn't know what she meant then, but that night, I went into the empty living room and sat on the floor where the piano used to be. The moonlight spilled through the curtains, casting pale silver shapes across the walls. I closed my eyes and let the echo of her song play in my mind, note by note, until it felt like she was right there beside me. And for the first time since she'd played that final melody, the silence didn't hurt anymore. It simply listened. Days turned into weeks, and life, as it often does, began to move forward, or at least pretend to. Bills still came, deadlines still loomed, and the world outside our small house spun on as if nothing sacred had been lost. But inside, something had changed. Evelyn was softer now, not weaker, but gentler, like she had finally made peace with something long unresolved. She spent her mornings tending to the small garden behind the kitchen, humming to herself as she watered the lavender and mint. Sometimes I caught fragments of melodies between her hums, the same notes from her unfinished songs, woven into the rhythm of her days. Lily had started recording her own music again. She wasn't classically trained, but her voice carried the same warmth Mom's piano once did. Late at night, I'd hear her singing softly through the thin walls, unfinished songs that somehow felt like continuations of Evelyn's. And me? I was still searching, searching for what my mother had meant. Don't let silence be the only thing you inherit from me. It was late one evening when I decided to visit Marcus Lee. He lived in a small town an hour away, near the coast. I wanted to see the piano one last time, not as something we'd sold, but as something that still carried part of her. When I arrived, his home looked like something out of another time, a small cottage, surrounded by ivy, wind chimes whispering above the door. Marcus was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and hands that spoke of years spent coaxing beauty out of old wood. He greeted me with a kind smile. "You must be Nathan." "I am. Thank you for writing to us. My mom really appreciated your kindness." He led me inside. The air smelled faintly of varnish and cedar, and there, it was the piano. Gleaming again, its dark mahogany body restored to its former grace. "It's beautiful," I whispered. Marcus nodded, running his hand lightly across the lid. "Your mother took care of it. You can always tell when an instrument has been loved." He opened the lid and pressed a few keys. The sound was full, warm, alive. "She played like someone who didn't just hear music," Marcus said quietly. "She felt it. You can't fake that. It stays in the wood." I looked at him, unsure if I'd heard right. "It stays?" He smiled faintly. "Every piano keeps echoes. Faint vibrations, traces of the music played on it. That's why I say a piano never really forgets its owner." I stood there, absorbing the thought. The idea that somewhere in the grain of the wood, my mother's touch still lived a quiet pulse beneath the keys. Marcus gestured toward the bench. "Would you like to play something?" I almost said no. But then I sat down. The keys were smooth and cool beneath my fingers. I didn't know what to play. I'd never learned properly, just fragments from childhood lessons I'd abandoned too soon. So I let instinct guide me. A few hesitant notes, then a small melody, imperfect but familiar. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, listening. "That's her song," he said softly. I stopped. "What? The one she started all those years ago? The one she never finished?" My chest tightened. Somehow, without realizing it, my fingers had begun to piece together the melody she'd once played at dusk, only gentler, slower, as if the music itself was remembering her. When I lifted my hands, the air in the room felt different, full of something unsaid yet understood. Marcus smiled. "She's in there," he murmured. "And here." He pointed to my chest. "That's what real inheritance sounds like." On the drive home, the sun was setting, the sky brushed in hues of lavender and gold, the kind my mother used to stop and admire. I rolled down the window, the ocean air cool against my face, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel weighed down by guilt. Instead, I felt connected, as if the song she never finished had quietly handed me the baton to continue it. When I got home, Evelyn was sitting on the porch, her cardigan wrapped tight against the evening chill. She smiled when she saw me. "You went to see it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded. "It's beautiful again, Mom? You'd be happy to see it." She nodded slowly, her eyes distant but warm. "Then it's where it belongs." I hesitated. I played a little. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "You did?" I smiled faintly. It sounded like you. Her expression softened, not in pride, but something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. Or peace. "Then maybe it's finding its way home after all," she said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room again, the same spot where the piano once stood. Moonlight poured across the empty floorboards. I found myself tapping my fingers against my knee, mimicking the rhythm of her unfinished song. Slowly, it began to evolve. A variation, a new melody built from the echoes she left behind. Lily came out of her room, sleepy-eyed and smiling. "You're doing it again," she said softly. "Doing what?" "Talking to her." I looked down at my hands. Maybe I am. She sat beside me, resting, her head on my shoulder. "Then tell her I miss her too." I smiled, eyes glistening in the dim light. She knows. And for a moment I swore I heard it faintly, almost imperceptibly, the soft echo of a piano note lingering in the air. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was imagination, or maybe, just maybe, it was Evelyn still playing somewhere beyond silence. The following morning began quietly with the soft hum of the kettle and the smell of rain through the open kitchen window. Evelyn was already awake, sitting at the table with a letter in front of her, and a look I couldn't quite read. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "Good morning, sweetheart." Her voice carried the same tenderness it always had, but there was something different in her eyes, something lighter, like a burden had finally loosened its grip. I poured myself some coffee. "You're up early again." "Couldn't sleep," she said softly, folding the letter and setting it aside. "I was thinking about the piano." I nodded. I was too. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze calm but searching. "You went to see it, didn't you?" I smiled. "Yeah, it looks beautiful. Marcus did an incredible job restoring it." Her eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed far away, as though she could still hear it in her mind, every note, every breath. "I'm glad," she whispered. "That piano deserved to be loved again." Later that day, Lily found the letter Evelyn had been reading. It wasn't from Marcus this time. It was from the Brighton Music Conservatory, dated 3 weeks ago. "Dear Mrs. Hart, we are pleased to inform you that your composition, The Song of Quiet Things, has been accepted into our archival collection of American contemporary works from the 1970s. It will be digitally restored, cataloged, and preserved as part of our upcoming exhibition, Women Who Composed the Unheard. With gratitude for your contribution to musical history, Dr. Ruth Feldman, Director, Brighton Conservatory Archives." Lily's eyes widened. "Nathan, she didn't tell us." I took the letter, reading it twice, maybe 3 times, before the words truly settled. "She must have submitted it years ago," I said quietly. "Maybe she didn't think they'd ever reply." Lily smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "They called it The Song of Quiet Things. That's so her." And it was, every bit of it. When we told her we'd found the letter, Evelyn didn't look surprised. She simply smiled. "I thought they'd forgotten," she said, "but sometimes the world takes a while to listen." Her words hung there, soft and sure, and for a brief moment I realized that was exactly what her life had been. A melody the world had taken too long to hear. That weekend we decided to visit the conservatory. Evelyn agreed, though I could tell the trip exhausted her. The building was bright and airy, filled with the smell of polished wood and the faint echo of students practicing somewhere down the hall. A young woman at the reception desk smiled when she saw us. "Mrs. Hart, it's an honor. Your piece is beautiful. It's being played in Studio C if you'd like to listen." Evelyn's lips parted slightly. "Someone's playing it?" The woman nodded. "One of our scholarship students chose it for her recital. She said it reminded her of her mother." We followed the sound down a long corridor until we reached a glass-paneled studio. Inside, a young pianist, no older than 20, sat at a grand piano, her fingers dancing gracefully across the keys. It was her song, Evelyn's. But hearing it now interpreted by someone else, filled with youth and hope and reverence, was something transcendent. I looked at my mother. She was standing perfectly still, her hand over her mouth, her eyes shining with quiet tears. "She's playing it," she whispered. "She's really playing it." And for the first time in years, I saw something come back into her, that spark I thought had gone out forever. The way her shoulders straightened, her breath steadied, her whole being aligned with the rhythm of the music. It wasn't pride, it was peace. After the performance, the young pianist approached us shyly. "Mrs. Hart, your composition, it's beautiful. It feels like someone trying to remember how to love." Evelyn smiled, eyes misty. "That's exactly what it is, dear." The girl smiled back. "I'll be playing it at the conservatory's spring concert. I'd love for you to come." Evelyn reached out and gently took her hand. "I'd be honored." On the drive home, she was quiet, watching the fields roll by through the window. "I never thought anyone would hear my music," she said softly. "But maybe it wasn't meant to be heard until now." I looked over at her. "You made something that lasted, Mom. That's not nothing." She turned to me, smiling faintly. "It's everything." That night, she sat by the window again, humming the melody under her breath, not out of sorrow this time, but remembrance. Lily recorded a few moments of it on her phone without her noticing. "For later," she whispered to me. The following morning, Evelyn was still sitting by the window when I came downstairs. Her tea had gone cold. Her eyes were closed, but the softest smile lingered on her lips, and her right hand rested gently on the armrest as if poised above invisible piano keys. The funeral was small, just family and a few close friends. The conservatory sent a letter offering to dedicate the Song of Quiet Things in her name. They said her music would live on in their collection, that every year a student would perform it in her honor. Lily sang at the service. She sang softly, trembling at first, but by the end, her voice steadied, warm and clear. The same way Evelyn's hands once moved across the keys with grace and love and something infinite. And as her last note faded into the church rafters, I thought of my mother's final words to me. "Don't let silence be the only thing you inherit from me." That night, I sat again in the empty living room. The moonlight fell exactly where the piano used to stand. I placed my hand over the spot on the floor, the wood still faintly indented from its weight, and closed my eyes. I could almost hear it. The faint echo of her song, the song of quiet things, drifting somewhere just beyond this world. And this time, I didn't listen as her son. I listened as her continuation. The weeks after the funeral passed in a strange rhythm, slow, dreamlike, as if time itself were listening to something only it could hear. Grief is never loud at first. It hums quietly in the background, like a faint note that lingers long after the song has ended. Lily and I moved gently through the house, speaking softer than usual, careful not to disturb the silence that had settled there. It wasn't an empty silence anymore, though. It felt alive, like the air still carried traces of her music. Every morning, sunlight poured through the living room window, hitting that empty corner where the piano used to be. The same golden light that once touched Evelyn's hands now rested on nothing at all yet, somehow. It made the room glow. Sometimes I caught Lily standing there, eyes closed, swaying faintly to an invisible melody. And though neither of us said it, we both felt it, Mom's presence, in every quiet moment, in every gentle pause that filled the space she left behind. A few weeks later, we received another letter from the Brighton Conservatory. This one came on cream-colored stationery addressed to the Hart family. "Dear Nathan and Lily, we wanted to inform you that Evelyn Hart's composition, The Song of Quiet Things, has been chosen as the opening piece for our annual spring concert. We invite you both to attend as honored guests. In recognition of Evelyn's contribution to modern American composition, her restored piano will be used for the performance. It has been carefully transported to our main hall, where it now stands as a permanent feature of our heritage collection. With heartfelt gratitude, Dr. Ruth Feldman, I read it twice, then handed it to Lily. She pressed the paper to her chest and whispered, "She'd love this." I nodded. She would. We decided to go. The day of the concert, the hall was filled with light and soft chatter. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and varnished wood. When we walked in, a small plaque by the stage caught my eye. Evelyn Hart, 1949-2025. Composer, dreamer, mother. Her silence became her song. For a long moment, I just stared. Those words, her silence became her song, seemed to hold everything she had ever tried to tell me. The lights dimmed, the audience hushed, and then a young woman, the same pianist we'd met months ago, walked onto the stage. She bowed gracefully and sat before the piano. Mom's piano. The first notes of the Song of Quiet Things filled the hall. It was the same melody, yet somehow more. The pianist's touch was lighter, almost reverent, as if she too could feel Evelyn's spirit woven through every key. The music rose and fell like breath tender, human, eternal. Lily reached for my hand. We didn't look at each other, but I felt her tremble slightly as the melody reached its middle, that familiar passage that had once echoed through our home. And then came the ending. The ending Evelyn had never written down, but had played that night, the one she called her goodbye. The pianist had found it. Somehow, impossibly, she had felt it. The final chord lingered in the air long after her fingers lifted. The audience sat in silence for a moment before the applause began soft, then swelling like a wave. But I didn't clap. I couldn't. My hands were frozen in my lap, my heart too full. Because in that moment, I finally understood what Mom had meant all along. Music wasn't just sound, it was memory, love, and everything words couldn't hold. It was the bridge between what we lose and what remains. After the concert, Dr. Feldman found us in the lobby. "She left something for you?" she said. "A recording. We discovered it while preparing the exhibit." She handed me a small flash drive, tied with a ribbon. She must have sent it years ago, a spoken message attached to one of her submissions. That night, when Lily and I got home, we plugged it in. There was a faint crackle, and then her voice, warm, calm, unmistakably her. "If you're hearing this, it means the song found its way somewhere I never could, and that's enough for me. To my children, Nathan and Lily. I hope you know that silence was never my escape. It was my way of listening. Life is full of noise, and sometimes you only find the truth when everything else goes quiet. Don't fill your silence with fear. Fill it with love, with music, with something that matters. Remember, I never stopped playing. I just changed instruments." Her soft laugh followed faint, like a sigh before the recording ended. Lily cried quietly beside me, her head resting against my shoulder. I sat in silence, letting her words echo through the room, through my heart, through the years that would come after. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, rhythmic and soft, almost like fingers over piano keys. The next morning, I sat by her window and watched the sunrise the way she used to. The world was quiet, but not empty. I opened my laptop, loaded a music program, and began to write. Not a song exactly, but something close, fragments of a melody, pieces of everything she'd left behind. Lily joined me an hour later, humming as she added her voice to the sound. Together, we built something new, not a replication, but a continuation. The title came easily, The Sound That Stayed. And though the piano was miles away, though she was gone, I could still feel her there. Every note we played, every breath we took between them, it was her lesson, living on. Silence wasn't the end. It was where everything true began. Spring came early that year, the kind of spring that makes the air smell new damp soil, budding trees, and the promise of things that begin again. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, even with the empty space still sitting where the piano once stood. But it wasn't emptiness anymore. It was reverence, a quiet sort of peace that felt earned. Lily and I had started working on our music every evening after dinner. What began as small sketches of melodies had turned into something fuller, a project that neither of us could quite define. Sometimes it sounded like one of Mom's old songs, other times like something completely our own. One night, as Lily sang softly and I played along on my keyboard, she stopped mid-phrase. "You hear that?" she whispered. I frowned, pausing. "Hear what?" She smiled, shaking her head. "Nothing, just the quiet. It's not sad anymore, is it?" I listened. The air was still, but not empty. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the wind through the window crack, our breathing in sync, all of it formed a rhythm, subtle and alive. "No," I said softly. "It's not sad. It's home." Later, after Lily went to bed, I stayed up working on a new arrangement. The melody came to me in pieces, fragments of the Song of Quiet Things, woven with the tune I'd been building since her funeral. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't need it to be. Halfway through, I stopped. Something compelled me to check my messages. A new email sat at the top of my inbox. The subject line read, "Request permission to use Evelyn Hart's composition in film My Heart Caught." I opened it. "Dear Mr. Hart, my name is Amelia Rhodes, and I'm a film director, working on a documentary titled The Sound That Stayed. It's about unsung female composers whose work shaped lives in silence. Your mother's story has become central to it. We'd like to feature her composition, and if you agree, your collaborative continuation piece as part of the closing sequence. Your mother's music didn't just move people, it changed how they listen. With gratitude, Amelia Rhodes." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "Mom," I whispered, smiling faintly, "your song found another home." The following week, Amelia came to meet us in person. She was warm and curious, her eyes full of quiet admiration. She spoke about Evelyn's story like she'd known her, the mother who let her silence speak louder than words ever could. Lily and I showed her our unfinished track. She listened intently, her eyes closed the whole time. When it ended, she said softly, "That's not unfinished. That's the sound of continuation." Her words made something inside me shift. Maybe all of this, the pain, the music, the loss, had never been about endings at all. Maybe it had always been about carrying things forward. Recording day came sooner than expected. We went to a small studio downtown, simple, quiet, the kind of place Mom would have loved. The sound engineer dimmed the lights and nodded for us to begin. Lily's voice rose first, tender and clear, the melody lifting gently above the room. I played the chords on an old upright piano, not hers, but similar enough that for a moment I could almost imagine her sitting beside me. Halfway through the song, a tear rolled down Lily's cheek, but she didn't stop. She just sang softer, deeper. When the last note faded, we sat in silence for a long while. No one moved. The engineer wiped his eyes and said quietly, "That's it. That's the take." A few months later, the film premiered at a small independent theater by the coast. The lights dimmed, and the opening scenes played stories of women who'd written in obscurity, their music rediscovered decades later. Then came the final sequence, the Song of Quiet Things, blending seamlessly into the sound that stayed. Over the images of the ocean at dusk, Evelyn's voice played the same recording Marcus had found years ago. Don't fill your silence with fear. Fill it with love, with music, with something that matters. The theater was utterly still. When the screen faded to black, the audience rose to their feet. Not a loud applause, something gentler, more reverent, a standing silence that said more than clapping ever could. After the showing, people came to us quietly, strangers with tears in their eyes. One woman said, "Your mother reminded me of mine. She never got to share her art either." Another whispered, "That song, it felt like a prayer I didn't know I needed." I didn't have words, only gratitude, deep, aching gratitude that her music had found the ears it deserved. Outside, the sea wind carried the faint sound of gulls, and the horizon glowed soft and pink. I closed my eyes, breathing it in. Lily slipped her arm through mine. "Do you think she knows?" I smiled. "She doesn't need to. She feels it." That night, back home, I stood by the window again. The same view she loved, the moonlight spilling across the quiet yard, the steady rhythm of the world turning, unchanged, yet transformed. I picked up my guitar, letting my fingers drift over the strings. The melody came without thought, a slow, soft variation of her song. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was playing her music. I was speaking to her in the only language we both understood. And in the pauses between notes, I could almost hear her answer. Summer arrived with its quiet warmth, and the world outside seemed to hum with life again. The flowers my mother planted years ago bloomed wildly this season. Lavender, daisies, a single, stubborn rose bush that refused to die no matter how harsh the winters. Every morning, the scent drifted in through the kitchen window, filling the house with something familiar, something that felt like her. It had been nearly 6 months since the film premiered, and yet the echoes of it hadn't faded. The sound that stayed had found its way into festivals and streaming platforms, reaching people far beyond our small coastal town. Every few days, someone new would write a pianist from Japan, a student from Italy, a mother from Kansas, each message carrying the same quiet gratitude. Your mother's music reminded me of my own. Her song gave me peace after my father passed. It made me want to learn again. Each message was a reminder. Evelyn's silence had traveled farther than her voice ever could. One evening, Lily found me sitting in the backyard, staring at the fading sunset. The cicadas hummed, the air soft and heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't yet come. "You know," she said, setting down 2 mugs of tea, "Mom would have loved all of this." I smiled faintly. She never wanted fame, just to be understood. Lily nodded. "I think she finally is." We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the soft sounds of the world winding down the crickets, the distant crash of waves, the wind brushing through the lavender. The kind of sounds you don't really notice until someone teaches you how to listen. Mom had done that. She'd taught us how to listen not just to sound, but to life itself. A week later, we got a call from Dr. Feldman at the Brighton Conservatory. "Mr. Hart," she said warmly, "we're creating a permanent installation in our Heritage Hall, a listening room for Evelyn's compositions and her story. We'd like to include a message from you and Lily, if you'd be willing." I was quiet for a moment, surprised by the emotion that caught in my throat. "Of course," I said finally. She'd be honored. When I told Lily, she smiled. "A room filled with her silence," she said softly. "That's perfect." A month later, we stood in the conservatory once again. The room was small, but beautiful walls lined with photographs and handwritten sheet music, softly lit from above. In the center stood her piano, its surface gleaming under the light. Through hidden speakers, the song of quiet things played on a loop gently, endlessly, like a heartbeat. There was a plaque beside the piano. Evelyn Hart, 1949-2025, composer of Silence and Song. Listen long enough, and you'll hear the heart you thought was gone. Lily read it aloud, her voice trembling. Then she reached out and rested her fingertips on the piano lid. "Feels like she's still here," she whispered. "She is," I said quietly. Dr. Feldman guided us to a small recording booth where visitors could listen to archived messages from artists, friends, and family. She handed us each a microphone. "When you're ready," she said, smiling gently. Lily went first. "My mother taught me that music doesn't end when the sound stops. It lingers in people, in places, in hearts that needed to hear it. I used to think silence meant emptiness. But she showed me that silence is just another kind of song." Her voice broke a little at the end, but she didn't hide it. Then it was my turn. I took a slow breath. My mom believed that the spaces between notes were just as important as the notes themselves. That what you don't say can hold as much truth as what you do. She taught me to listen, really listen, and I think that's what music and love are made of. Listening. So if you're here, hearing her now, you're part of her song too. When I finished, Dr. Feldman wiped her eyes. "That's beautiful," she whispered. Later, after everyone left, Lily and I lingered in the listening room a little longer. The conservatory was quiet, the halls dim and echoing with the faint hum of air conditioning. I walked to the piano one last time. My reflection shimmered faintly in its polished wood. I ran my fingers over the keys, not pressing them, just tracing their edges. And for a moment, I could feel it again. Her warmth in the air, her rhythm in my heartbeat, her presence in the stillness. Lily came up beside me, slipping her arm around my waist. "Play something," she said softly. I smiled. "No, I think she's playing enough for both of us." We stood there together, the two of us in the soft light, surrounded by her sound, not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel. As we walked out into the night, the rain finally began to fall. Not heavy, just a soft drizzle that kissed the earth, like applause from the sky. And I remembered her voice from that old recording, whispering, "Don't fill your silence with fear. Fill it with love, with music, with something that matters." I turned to Lily. "You think she knows we're still listening?" Lily smiled, eyes glinting with tears and moonlight. She never stopped knowing, Nathan. We just finally started hearing. That night, back home, I opened my notebook and wrote one last line beneath the title of our new song, dedicated to the woman who taught us that silence was never the absence of sound, it was the beginning of it. And as I closed the book, the world around me seemed to hum again softly, endlessly with the music that never truly ended. Autumn came gently that year, leaves brushing against the windows like fingers across piano keys. The air crisp but not cold yet. The world seemed to move slower, quieter, like it too had learned how to listen. Life had started to find its rhythm again. Lily was performing at small local venues now, her songs a blend of her voice and our mother's melodies. Each performance carried a softness, that calm, reflective tone that had become Evelyn's legacy. She didn't sing for fame. She sang for feeling. I, on the other hand, had begun teaching music theory at the community center downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. Every time I explained to my students the importance of pauses, of space, of letting a note breathe, I could almost hear Mom whispering, "Exactly." One Thursday afternoon, after class, I found a letter waiting for me at home. The handwriting was neat and familiar Marcus Lee. "Dear Nathan, I hope this finds you and Lily well. I thought you might like to know that Evelyn's piano is still being played. The conservatory students love it. They say it sounds warmer than any other instrument in the hall. Some even claim it responds to gentle hands. I like to think that's your mother's touch still guiding them. I've been asked to restore a similar piano, same make, same era, and I thought of you. If you ever wish to have something like hers again, not as a replacement, but as a remembrance, I'd be honored to help you find it. With respect, Marcus, I read it twice, then set it down. The offer was kind, generous even. But what struck me most was that line, "It responds to gentle hands." It made me wonder if Mom's spirit really did linger there, in the vibrations of the strings, in the whisper of each note, and maybe she'd never really left. That night, I dreamt of her. We were in the old living room, the piano back in its place. She was sitting at it, her hands moving lightly across the keys. The melody was slow and tender, not one I recognized, but something familiar all the same. When she finished, she turned to me with that same calm smile she always had. "Do you hear it now?" she asked. "Hear what?" I said. She gestured toward the piano, the silence between notes. "It's the only part that ever really belongs to you." I woke up before I could answer, but her words stayed. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the thought of the dream. I started listening differently, not to the world, but within it. The whisper of the rain against glass, the hush before Lily began to sing, the echo of footsteps down the empty hall of the conservatory when I visited to speak about the film. Each sound felt layered, as though somewhere beneath it all was her. Not gone, not lost, just quieter. It was during one of those visits that Dr. Feldman stopped me in the hallway. "I meant to tell you," she said, adjusting her glasses. "We've begun using Evelyn's piece in our first-year curriculum as an example of composition through restraint." I smiled. "Through restraint?" She nodded. "Yes. How to convey emotion, not through grand gestures, but through stillness. Your mother understood something most composers spend a lifetime chasing." That evening, I walked through the practice rooms as the sun dipped low, golden light pouring across the polished floors. From one of the rooms, I heard her melody. A student was playing the Song of Quiet Things, slow and hesitant at first, but with care. I leaned against the doorway, unseen, listening as the notes rose and fell like waves coming home to shore. The student paused, adjusted her fingers, then continued the same pause Evelyn used to take when she'd forget a line, and smiled to herself before finding her way back. For a second, I closed my eyes and saw her there again, not as she'd been at the end, but younger, alive, her hands dancing across the keys. And in that stillness between sound and memory, I felt something settle quietly inside me. When I returned home that night, Lily was sitting by the window with her guitar. The moonlight poured over her like a soft spotlight. She looked up. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, sitting across from her. "I heard one of Mom's songs being played at the conservatory today." Her smile was small, knowing. "She's still teaching, huh?" I nodded. "Always will be." She strummed her guitar softly, a gentle, slow rhythm. I joined her with the melody I'd been working on, our sounds overlapping, complementing, breathing together. Halfway through, Lily closed her eyes and began to hum. Her voice was low, pure, and for a moment, it didn't sound like just her. It sounded like her and Mom. The harmony was imperfect, fragile, but it was real. And it filled the house in a way silence never could. Afterward, Lily leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you think music ever dies?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "No, I said softly. I think it just changes. Form moves into different hands, different hearts. She smiled sleepily. Like love. Exactly like love. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the window. The lavender swayed in the moonlight. The air carried that faint hum again, that living, breathing quiet that had become part of us. And I realized that the piano, the melodies, the lessons, none of it was ever truly gone. It had simply moved where all real music eventually does, into the people it touched. That night, before I went to bed, I stood in the empty corner of the living room, her corner, and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't expect an answer, but somehow, in the pause that followed, I felt one, not in words, in warmth, in peace, in the quiet between heartbeats. Winter crept in quietly that year, a soft, gray kind of winter that didn't roar with storms, but sighed through the trees like an old lullaby. The first snow came early, blanketing the yard, the lavender beds, the path leading to the porch. Everything looked still, peaceful, the kind of stillness that isn't emptiness, but rest. It had been nearly a year since Mom passed. The anniversary was approaching, though neither Lily nor I had said the words out loud. We didn't need to. It lived in the air between us, gentle and unspoken. That morning, I woke early to find Lily already up, standing by the window in her robe, a mug of tea cupped in her hands. The pale morning light traced her features in silver. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "Didn't want to? It's the day." I nodded. "No need to ask which day?" We spent most of the morning in silence. There was no ceremony, no ritual, just quiet understanding. I made pancakes the way Mom used to, a little too thick in the middle, and we sat together at the kitchen table, the smell of butter and coffee filling the air. Halfway through breakfast, Lily reached across the table and took my hand. "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" I smiled faintly. "I think she already was." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I've been writing something for her." "Yeah?" She hesitated, then said softly, "But I don't think it's just for her anymore. It's for you too." That evening, after the sunset, we drove to the conservatory. They'd invited us to a small private event, a candlelit recital in the Heritage Room, where Evelyn's piano now stood. The hall was dim and golden, filled with the soft glow of candles flickering along the walls. A handful of students and faculty gathered quietly, their faces warm with reverence. At the center, the piano gleamed. Its polished surface reflected the lights like rippling water. Dr. Feldman greeted us with her usual kindness. "We thought this would be a fitting way to honor her," she said. "Would you like to say a few words before we begin?" I looked at Lily. She nodded. I stepped forward, my voice steady but soft. "My mother used to say that music was how she prayed. She didn't talk much about faith, but when she played, you could feel it, that belief in something bigger than herself. I used to think her silence meant distance, but now I understand it was just another form of devotion. She was listening." A pause, the sound of breath in the still room. She taught me that silence isn't empty. It's full of everything we haven't yet said. And tonight, I think she's still listening to all of us. The audience was quiet. Then Lily stood, her guitar slung over her shoulder, and walked to the front. "This song," she said softly, "is for our mother. But it's also for anyone who's ever loved something that couldn't stay." She strummed the first chord low, warm, resonant. The melody began simply, built around the rhythm of the Song of Quiet Things, but it soon unfolded into something else, something freer, more alive. Her voice filled the hall, fragile and luminous. "You taught me how to listen to things that never speak, to find the heart of stillness in the places silence keeps. I thought your song had ended when your hands left the keys, but I hear you in the spaces between the notes and me." Her voice trembled on the last line, but she didn't falter. The piano behind her, untouched, seemed to hum faintly in sympathy, a vibration too soft to hear, but enough to feel. When she finished, no one clapped. They didn't need to. Every person in the room was caught in that sacred quiet, the kind of silence Mom would have called the purest sound. After the recital, the candles burned low. Most of the guests had gone, but Lily and I stayed behind, standing before the piano. She ran her fingers along the keys without pressing them. "I miss her," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but she's here." Lily smiled faintly. "Always." We stood like that for a long while, two silhouettes in the fading glow, listening not for music, but for presence. Then, slowly, I reached out and pressed a single note, middle C. It rang softly through the room, pure and steady. The sound faded, leaving a warmth in its wake. "That's her," Lily said. "Yeah," I whispered. "That's her." When we finally left, the snow had stopped. The moonlight reflected off the white ground, the air sharp and clean. I could hear the crunch of snow under our boots, rhythmic even, almost like the pulse of a metronome. "Do you ever think," Lily asked as we walked to the car, "that we're still part of her song?" I smiled. "We always were. She just changed the key." That night, back home, I lit a candle by the window and opened my notebook. The house was still. Outside, the world shimmered in quiet white. I began to write, not about loss, but about continuation. How music doesn't end, it simply changes form. How love, once given, keeps moving forward, taking new shapes, new sounds. When I finished, I read the first line aloud. "In every silence lives a song that never stopped singing." I closed the notebook and sat there a while, eyes half closed, listening. And somewhere, maybe in memory, maybe in the space between heartbeats, I heard her again, playing. Not an ending. A return. The new year arrived softly, as if careful not to disturb the memory of what had been. The snow melted in slow whispers, revealing the damp earth beneath, and with it came the first hint of spring, a faint, hopeful scent that filled the air like the breath before a song begins. Lily had started rehearsing again. Her music had grown deeper, richer, not louder, but more honest. Every chord she played, every lyric she wrote seemed to carry a piece of Mom's heartbeat in it. She called her new album Echoes of Quiet Things. When she showed me the cover art, a sketch of a woman sitting at a piano beneath a tree in bloom, I couldn't speak for a moment. "That's her," I finally said. Lily smiled softly. "It's all of us." My life had found its rhythm too. The community center had offered me a full-time position, teaching not just music theory, but the emotional storytelling of sound. I called the course Listening Between the Lines. Students came expecting to learn scales and structure, but I taught them something else entirely. That music isn't made of notes, it's made of moments. I told them about Mom, about Evelyn Hart, who once sold silence as a form of truth. About how she believed every sound we make tells the story of who we are, and every silence reveals who we've lost. Some of them cried, some just listened, but all of them left changed. And in every class, before I began, I said the same thing she once told me. Don't play to be heard, play to understand. One evening after class, I stayed late at the center. The room was empty, lit only by the faint orange glow of a desk lamp. On the stage sat an old upright piano, not hers, but something close enough. I lifted the fallboard, letting my fingers rest on the keys. The familiar weight of ivory beneath my hands felt grounding, like touching a memory made real. I played her melody, the Song of Quiet Things, but as I played, something shifted. My hands began to move differently, slower, tracing out new shapes, new harmonies. Without realizing it, I was composing, again, not her song, not mine, but something that felt like both. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was gratitude. And when the last note faded into the air, I whispered, "I understand now." That weekend, Lily and I drove to the coast, the same place we'd scattered her ashes a year ago. The sky was pale blue, the sea calm and shimmering beneath the sunlight. We carried with us something small, a music box. It was handcrafted, carved from dark oak, and when opened, it played the melody she'd written all those years ago, delicate and clear, just a few notes repeating endlessly. "I thought we could leave it here," Lily said, kneeling near the water's edge. "Somewhere it can keep playing." I nodded. Together, we set it gently on a flat rock. The wind caught the melody and carried it across the water, each note dissolving into the sea breeze. We stood there, listening. "I used to think letting go meant forgetting," I said quietly. "But now I think it just means making space." Lily smiled faintly, tears glistening. Space for the music to come back. On the drive home, we barely spoke. The car was filled with the kind of silence that doesn't need breaking. Every now and then, I'd glance at the passenger seat, Lily's head resting against the window, her earbuds in, the faint sound of her humming along to something I couldn't hear. I realized that this peace, this stillness, was what Mom had been trying to teach us all along. Life isn't about volume or achievement or applause. It's about the spaces between the notes, the quiet truths that exist when everything else falls away. That night, when I got home, I found a small envelope waiting in the mail. The handwriting was elegant and unfamiliar. Inside was a postcard, a photograph of the conservatory's listening room. The caption read, "For those who taught us how to hear again." On the back was a short message. "Dear Mr. Hart, I visited the Heritage Room today and listened to your mother's music for the first time. I don't know why, but it felt like coming home. Thank you for sharing her with the world. Sincerely, Amelia Rhodes." I turned the card over again, studying the photo. The piano gleamed under the soft museum lights, and there, reflected faintly in its surface, I could swear I saw her Evelyn smiling. That night, I opened the window of my room. The wind was cool, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the whisper of the ocean far in the distance. I sat by the sill, guitar in hand, and began to play the melody one more time. The notes floated into the dark, fragile and luminous, blending with the night sounds, the crickets, the breeze, the hum of life itself. And somewhere between one chord and the next, I stopped playing. Not because I forgot, but because I finally understood the part she had always tried to show me. That the truest music isn't made by sound, it's made by listening. I closed my eyes, and the world seemed to hold its breath with me. In that stillness, she was there. Always had been. Always would be. The second spring after her passing came in softly, just as she would have liked quiet mornings, gentle sunlight through linen curtains, and birds singing in fragments that almost sounded like her old melodies. Time had folded itself neatly since then, smoothing the sharp edges of grief into something tender. Not gone, just easier to hold. The world had moved on, but she never really left it. Not for me, not for Lily. Everywhere I turned, there she was in the lavender that refused to die, in the wind that brushed through the open windows, in the pauses between Lily's laughter. Some nights, when the moonlight fell just right on the living room floor, I could almost see her hands, again poised above invisible keys, ready to begin another song that never needed an audience. The conservatory invited us again, that April, not for a concert this time, but for something more permanent. When we arrived, the Heritage Hall had changed. At its entrance now stood a bronze sculpture, A pair of gentle hands resting on a piano's surface, not pressing, just feeling. Beneath it, an engraving read, Evelyn Hart, 1949-2025. She taught the world that silence was never empty. I stared at it for a long while, tracing the words with my eyes. There was no sorrow, no ache, only a deep, quiet gratitude. Lily stood beside me, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. She'd probably tell us this is too much fuss, she said softly. I smiled, and then she'd secretly love it. We both laughed, not loudly, but enough to make the air feel warm. Inside the hall, her piano stood in the same place, but now there was something new. A small plaque beside the bench, labeled Visitor's Invitation. You are welcome to play. It was such a simple phrase, but it carried her entire philosophy in it. Music wasn't something to be guarded, it was something to be shared. A young boy sat at the bench when we entered. He couldn't have been older than 12, his hands tentative as he pressed each key. The melody was uneven, searching but familiar. Her melody. The boy noticed us watching and smiled shyly. It's my favorite song, he said. It sounds like someone remembering something good. Lily's eyes shimmered. That's exactly what it is. After he left, the curator approached us with a small envelope. We found this in one of the piano's side compartments during its last cleaning, she said. It's addressed to you? I took it carefully. The handwriting was hers. We sat on one of the benches by the window, sunlight spilling across the floor like gold. My hands trembled a little as I unfolded the letter. My dear Nathan and Lily, if you're reading this, it means the music outlived me, which is exactly how it should be. There's something you should know. The Song of Quiet Things was never meant to be my song alone. I wrote it for both of you, for the people I loved most, who taught me that the spaces between notes are where the heart truly speaks. If you ever feel lost, play something. Anything. Even if it's just a single note, because music doesn't need to be beautiful, to be honest. And when you play, know that I'll be listening, not from above, but from within. All my love, always. Mom. By the time I finished, Lily was crying silently. I folded the letter back into its envelope, the paper soft and warm from our hands. For a long moment, we didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. That evening, we stayed in the hall after everyone had gone. The lights dimmed, the air still and hushed. Lily sat at the piano. I stood beside her. Ready? She asked. I nodded. And together we began to play. Not perfectly, not even the same way she would have, but every mistake, every pause, every imperfect harmony felt right, like it belonged, because the song was never meant to be flawless. It was meant to be alive. When the final chord faded, Lily lifted her hands slowly from the keys. Do you think she heard that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled. She didn't have to. She felt it. As we walked outside, the night air was cool and fragrant with rain. The sky was scattered with stars, faint but steady. Lily slipped her hand into mine. Do you ever think about how it started? Just one moment, you telling her you sold the piano. I laughed quietly. Yeah, feels like a lifetime ago. It was, she said softly. The kind that never really ends? We stood there in silence, the city lights flickering faintly in the distance. And in that silence, I realized something I'd never fully understood until that moment. It wasn't about the piano, or the song, or even the loss. It was about the listening. All of it, the grief, the love, the music, had been her way of teaching us to listen, to hear life as it truly was. Imperfect, fleeting, but full of meaning if you just stayed still long enough to notice. That night, back home, I opened the window again and let the night breeze in. Lily's soft humming drifted from her room down the hall, the same melody Mom used to play when we were children. I turned off the lights, sat in the darkness, and closed my eyes. Somewhere deep in that silence, I heard it again. Faint, gentle, eternal. A piano, one note, and then another, and then finally the rest of the song. Not from memory, not from sorrow, but from love. And for the first time, it didn't sound like a goodbye anymore. It sounded like a beginning. Spring deepened, and with it came a gentle sense of renewal, the kind that doesn't announce itself with noise, but with quiet insistence. The air felt lighter now. The house didn't echo with emptiness anymore. It breathed. It lived. Lily's album was released that month. Echoes of Quiet Things found its way to listeners all over the world. Her voice, soft, steady, full of quiet strength, carried pieces of our mother's music woven through every song. The reviews called it a symphony of stillness, a masterpiece in restraint, a work that teaches you how to feel without words. When I listened to it for the first time, sitting in the same living room where everything began, I cried. Not the kind of tears born from grief, but the kind that come from recognition, from understanding that something once lost had finally found its way home. The album ended with one track titled "Her Silence Spoke First." It began with a single piano note, pure and clear, before dissolving into the sound of Lily's humming, the same lullaby Mom used to hum when the world outside our windows was too loud to sleep through. It wasn't a song about her. It was her. The conservatory sent us a photograph. A week later, the Heritage Room, sunlight spilling across the piano. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, sat on the bench with her small hands hovering over the keys. The caption beneath the image read, "The song continues." That was when I realized music doesn't die when the player stops. It changes hands, it moves through hearts, waiting to be heard again. And that's what she'd been teaching us all along, that endings aren't silence, they're openings. They're the pause before the next note begins. One evening, I returned to the coast alone this time. The sea was calm, the horizon gold with sunset. I found the same spot where we'd left the little music box a year before. The tide had carried it away long ago, but the melody still seemed to drift in the air, faint and unending. I sat on the sand, closed my eyes, and listened. The ocean moved with the rhythm of her song, slow, eternal, forgiving. "Mom," I whispered, the wind catching my words. "Thank you for teaching me how to hear you, even when you stopped speaking." And in that moment, I understood what her silence had been all along. It wasn't absence. It was trust in us, in music, in the idea that love continues even when the sound fades. The sky darkened slowly. I stood, brushing the sand from my hands. Somewhere behind me, the world was still full of noise, but here, now, there was peace. A soft breeze passed, carrying what sounded like one faint, perfect note through the air. I smiled. "Good night, Mom." And the note lingered, not fading, not ending, just being, the way she taught me to listen, forever.